Is Amanda Heiner, and on behalf of University College, Katerina Moyan, and I would like to welcome you to our first Common Book event of the spring 2020 semester. Before we start, I'd like to just quickly ask all of you to just check your cell phones and the electronic devices, make sure those are silent so we don't have any interruptions. So I just wanted to remind you about that. It is my pleasure to welcome Winthrop alumna, Ms. Candace Porter Carroll, Director of Grassroots Operations at Americans for Prosperity, South Carolina. Ms. Carroll will introduce our guest speaker tonight, Mr. Matthew Charles, who will speak on the topic of criminal justice reform in connection with this year's common book, Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson.
Thank you for that kind introduction. As Amanda mentioned, my name is Candace Carroll. I'm an alum of Winthrop University's Political Science Department, and I'm currently the Director of Grassroots Operations with Americans for Prosperity. We're a national, nonpartisan grassroots organization that recruits and unites concerned citizens to return to prison. He had turned his life around and had been free for a year and a half when it was ruled that he had to serve the remaining 10 years of his sentence. Matthew's case made national headlines and sparked calls for clemency. And on January 3rd of 2019, he was released once and for all as the Step Act, which was signed into law in December of 2018, included a provision to apply the Fair Sentencing Act retroactively, which the government agreed would allow for Matthew's immediate release. Matthew was acknowledged in President Trump's remarks at the 2019 State of the Union address, which he attended as a guest of the First Lady, Melania Trump. His case was covered by USA Today, NPR, The New York Times, Dana Perino, and more. He is currently working as a Justice Fellow for FAM, which is Families Against Mandatory Minimums, a position that allows him to travel around the nation sharing his incredible story and ideas concerning the need for criminal justice reform. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Matthew Charles.
All right, thank you, Candace. My name is Matthew Charles, and I want to thank you all for welcoming me to Winthrop College. I want to thank Americans for Prosperity. I want to thank the students. Before I go into sharing my story, that gives you a more clear picture of the person that I was prior to 1996 and the person that I became after 1996, I just want to state that I do take accountability for all of my wrong actions. And the reason I state that is because whenever I share my story, some of the experiences that I endured shaped me or molded me in one way or another into the person that I actually was at that time as opposed to the person that I am now. And I'm going to have a seat as I speak. Okay. In December of 1995, I was arrested for felony drug possession because a friend of mine who was also a drug dealer at the time had ended up getting arrested. And when he got arrested, it became known that he was a soldier in the United States military. And because he was a soldier in the United States military, military law is a little bit different from civilian law. So they told him that they wanted to get all the people that were associated with the drug transaction. So he ended up calling me by phone, and he actually told the agents that he had two suppliers. And he tried to call both of them, and then I actually picked up the phone, so I was recorded. So in December of 1995, I was arrested for felony drug possession and gun violations. And while in the county jail, I ended up meeting a friend named Jesus Duran by way of Arizona. And he was in there because he had drove a tractor-trailer load of marijuana from the state of Arizona to Tennessee. But he had been in there a while before I actually even got there. So once I ended up getting there, me and him became friends, and then about I want to say less than 3 weeks or a month later, he ended up being sentenced to 5 years and receiving a fine and was being transferred. But in the process of all of that, because we were friends, he ended up leaving me his possessions because we were actually in the county jail. And those possessions consisted of some toiletries, deodorant, soap, toothpaste, and at the time there was a King James Version Bible there as well. And when he handed me the package as he was about to leave, I was like taken aback, you know what I mean? I was like struck because me and him never spoke about religion. I've never seen him with the Bible or seen him read the Bible, but yet it was in the bulk of the stuff that he was handing over to me. So at the time, I hope I don't offend anybody, but I didn't believe in God. I definitely believe in him now, but I didn't at that time because of my upbringing. My father was a very verbal and physically abusive person because he was an alcoholic. And in my mindset, God never came to rescue me, my siblings, or my mother from the hands of my dad, so I didn't believe in God. And then I had some grandparents, and my grandparents professed to be Christians, but they would come over every weekend or every other weekend to the house and see my mother with black eyes, swollen jaws, busted lips, and not say one word. So that also helped me make up my stand against not even believing, period. But back to what I was stating, he had this Bible in the bulk of the possessions that he was giving unto me. So I took it because, as I stated, I wanted those other items because I'm in the county jail, and every penny matters in there. I know out here in the world, sometimes you walk by and you see a dime on the ground, whatever, just keep walking. It's not worth bending down, but in jail or in prison, every penny counts. So I took it, but I had no intention on actually reading that Bible. I just took that because I wanted the hygiene items, and I put the Bible in my cell. But because books were scarce and I was in the county jail, I just started reading it. But I read it as a book. I read it from Genesis to Revelation. It had some beautiful stories in it. But to me at that time, all it was some stories. But little did I know God was actually drawing me in, doing what he does best. So therefore, he was working on me. So I read it through, then I started reading it again. And to make a long story short in regards to that, in February of 1996, I surrendered my heart and life over to the Lord Jesus Christ. Well, when I done that, everything changed. And when I say everything changed, I'm telling you that I used to be probably as hard as a brick wall, emotionally and physically, because of the abuse that I had actually went through from my father. What I mean by that is my father, because I stopped probably crying around the age of 13 or 14 because I no longer, felt what he was doing. He would try to come up with creative ways to beat me, which would, taking water hoses and duct taping them or cutting a slap out of a car tire. But I was like numb to the pain. I had just come that deadened to the world. And the reason I'm making these statements is not so that anyone can feel sorry for me, but to just show you the mental state that I was in prior to receiving Christ in 1996 when I say everything changed. Because when I mean that everything changed, I started caring about other people and caring about myself, whereas before I couldn't care less whether they live or die because I could care less whether I live or die. So after I made that transition over, I just started reading the Bible and attending Bible study courses and trying to do everything that I could to learn more about this new faith. Well, in the process of doing that, I just ended up doing the right thing. So once they ended up sending me off to federal prison, well, let me back up. This took place in February of 1996 when I ended up giving my heart and life over to the Lord. I was sentenced in December of 1996 to a 35-year sentence. So there was a span of about 10 months. So I had 10 months of getting a little bit of faith. But when the judge sentenced me to the 35 years, I was like, wow, I didn't kill anybody. I was taken back by the sentence, and I was heartbroken. And I was believing that even though, God had no reason to help me, but he helps everybody, I was like, wow. And then I came up with the dumb idea, hopefully nobody repeats it, in your own, faith or whatever. But I was like, well, God didn't help me then, maybe he'll help me now. So I went into federal prison. Once I ended up going into federal prison, they took me to a place called USB Terror Hut, which is a high custody, violent prison. As a matter of fact, they called it Terror Dome. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because normally I would thrive in an environment like that because that's what had been conditioned to do all of my life. But as I'm getting off of the bus, about to enter into the complex, I can feel the anger, the rage, and I could sense it within me. So that immediately told me something had changed about myself. Because normally I'd have went in and I'd adapted to it and just been normal. But now I feel it before I even enter it. So I'm like, wow. So I end up going in and I'll go over to the chapel and ask the chaplain when were the Bible study classes, when was church services, and were there any other fellow believers there. So he actually introduced me to some of his workers, and we started hanging out on the yard, doing Bible study sessions together, and just still doing the right thing. Well, in 2000, a lot of laws changed prior to 2010. And that's the reason when I speak about criminal justice, I'm just throwing a side nugget in. When I speak about criminal justice reform, it is my belief that everything should be made retroactive. If it's something being changed, amended, or struck down that wronged somebody in the past, or you know is a clear injustice, then why not, since you utilize those people to show the wrongness of it or the unjustness of it, why not also make sure that those people benefit from it? But whenever something is not made retroactive, they don't get the benefit of benefiting from it. They just are like the test subjects that were used to show. Now, don't get me wrong, I was glad to see 3 different laws change that were not made retroactive that could have affected me and set me free before January 3rd, 2019. Because it's my belief that as long as you get it right from this forward, I'm glad because it stopped. But if you can reach back and get some of those people that were done that way, that will even be even greater. So I'm a strong supporter of retroactivity. But anyway, in 2010, the law changed. And what I mean by the law change is you have former prosecutors, current prosecutors, former judges, state and federal, as well as current judges, state and federal, scientists, the Sheriff's Association, the Prosecutors Association, they all agreed that the only difference between the 2 drugs, one that allowed you to get a 100-to-1 sentence as opposed to the other, was the fact that it was sold by people of color in places of color. So therefore, once that law changed in 2010, it allowed me to apply for a reduction of sentence. And in applying for a reduction of sentence, that meant that I was able to get a 12 or 14-year less sentence just without the racial disparity being attached to the sentence. So that's a significant difference. So and that's only at 18-to-1. It still haven't been made 1-to-1. In 2010, it was changed from 100-to-1 to 18-to-1. So it's still not 1-to-1. But everybody believe that it should because they state literally it's the same drug, it's just sold by different people and in different places. So anyway, I filed a petition, and Chief Judge Kevin Sharp ended up reducing my sentence, and I went free in 2016 after 21 years and 5 months behind bars. And the prosecutor appealed my release. And that's another thing when it comes to, I'm going to keep throwing some side nuggets in as I speak. That's another thing when it comes to criminal justice reform. There's a difference between hanging on to a conviction as opposed to hanging on to an unjust sentence. So the prosecutor, the conviction stood. I was guilty. I sold drugs. I need to be held accountable. But the sentence, even after it was clearly shown that there was racial disparity attached to it, was still being fought for me to keep by the prosecutor. So he appealed my release once I was released in 2016. But me and my attorneys at the time, I had 2 public defenders that have always filed petitions on my behalf and tried to keep me free even when I was ordered to go back in May of 2018. But anyway, what had taken place was I filed a petition. Judge Kevin Sharp released me. The prosecutor appealed it. I was out for nearly 2 years, 22 months, nearly 2 years. And during the time that I was out, I had a job, I had a truck, I had a church home, and I was volunteering my time and services, doing everything that you would want somebody that has been released from incarceration to do, which is be a productive tax-paying member of society. So I covered all those bases, but still that wasn't enough. But anyway, after 22 months, the Court of Appeals handed down their decision, which is a three-panel, which is 3 judges that make up the panel, and in it they agreed with the prosecutor that it wasn't made, the law, that is the 2010 Fair Sentencing Act, wasn't made retroactive, fully retroactive, therefore I had to be returned to prison. But they also did something, show you how good God is, they also did something that was very, very unusual. They put in that opinion that my period of incarceration of having no infractions, but they literally stated this way, I'll tell it the other way in a minute, but what they literally stated was that my rehabilitation is such of a remarkable capacity that I should seek a clemency or pardon from the president. They put that in their literal opinion and then put it out there. So we was able also to take that information and share it with the White House administration as well as with senators and representatives in Washington, D.C., just the opinion alone, showing that it was no longer about rehabilitation because I was clearly rehabilitated. They don't really realize it, but I was transformed, I was changed, but we'll call it rehabilitation. So therefore, they was able to see that I was fully rehabilitated, so the purpose of me going back had to be only punitively. So in other words, I was sent back because I didn't serve 30 years of that 35-year sentence, which I would have had to do at 85%. It's 29 years, 7 months, so it's still at 30 years, you know what I mean? So that meant the day that I received the 35-year sentence, once the judge gave it to me, I had to serve nearly 30 years before I was released, whether I did good or bad throughout my period of incarceration. So what had taken place was I ended up receiving that order from the Court of Appeals. Actually, I got that order from the Court of Appeals when I was heading to Murfreesboro, Tennessee to attend a wedding. And my public defender ended up calling me on the phone, and then she was like, well, the Court of Appeals came out with a ruling, and they stated you had to return to prison. And she was like, where you at? I was like, wow, I'm on the way to Murfreesboro, Tennessee to attend a wedding. And she was like, okay. Well, you can come by, I think she said the following day or the next work day once you get back, and we'll talk about it because we're trying to get you a hearing before the judge, because in the ordered the judge to reinstate my original 35-year sentence. So I went on to the wedding, and once I got back, I ended up going to her office, and they had set a date for me to see the judge for her to reinstate my 35-year sentence. But in the process of that, everybody was outraged. But at the time, it was only the local community, those that I interacted with, that knew about it. So therefore, they was like, this is not right. So a friend of mine who owns a radio station, or runs a radio station in Texas, San Antonio, Texas, he started reaching out to senators and different reporters and everything. So John Hairston ended up sending a letter to all of them people, including an NPR reporter named Julietta Martinelli. And once she got it and read it, because his letters was just, so in depth, and she ended up coming to the little pantry that I volunteered at so that she could meet me personally. And she was asking me all these questions, and I was telling her, yes, this is so, yes, that's so. And then she said, I'm going to look into it and talk to some of my colleagues and investigate it further. And when she did, she was able to get a record of my incarceration. And once she got a record of my incarceration, she was able to see that I had actually been incarcerated for 21 years and 5 months without one single infraction or disciplinary report. That fact didn't even become known to me until she made it. I just tried to do the right thing each day and stay away from, the violence and the trouble. And then when she brought that to my attention, I was like, wow. And she was like, you didn't even know it. I was like, nope. And I still don't know how I done it to this day, but I attribute that to God and me trying to have the character of God. But anyway, once she did that, then she was able to also pull up the information about what I had done throughout my period of incarceration. When I came in, the Federal Bureau of Prison has a rule, it's a law, that if you do not have your GED or high school diploma, you got to take GED classes. Well, I had a high school diploma. I also had an honorable discharge certificate because I had been into the military. But the high school diploma wasn't showing in my PSI report, which is a pre-sentence investigative report. And the Federal Bureau of Prisons used that pre-sentence investigative report like it's the law. If it ain't in there, it don't exist. So when I'm in West Virginia, they call me down to take a GED test. So I go to the education department, they talking about taking a GED test. I'm like, I got a high school diploma. They're like, no, you don't. And I'm like, yes, I do. I said, I graduated in '84, and I even got my military honorable discharge certificate. They said, well, we see that, but we don't see the other. So they was like, you got to take this test. So I'm steady, not arguing with them, but just trying to say, I mean, when you know you have a high school diploma, and they're telling you that they don't, you just try to be like, it's just insane here. So they was like, well, if you don't take the test and start the class, we're going to have to put you in the SHU, which is the special housing, known as the hole in some of the state facilities. And so I was like, no problem. So I took the test, and I ended up scoring pretty good on the test, that they thought maybe I did have a doggone high school diploma. You know what I mean? So they was like, okay. They said, what we'll do is try to contact the school and get them to send a copy of it to us, but you won't have to start the classes until then. So I went on back to the housing unit and was doing whatever I was doing on the compound, and then I get called down there again, and not only do they tell me they have now secured a copy of my high school diploma, but they asked me, do I want to be a GED tutor? So I ended up becoming a GED tutor, and I was blessed to be able to help, I would say, over or above 250 different incarcerated people to receive their GEDs based on whatever level they was, bringing them up to where they needed to be to pass the test. The only sad part is some of the guys were at a 6th grade level, some at a 3rd grade level. It depended upon the age. And mind you, I'm 53 years old, so therefore I'm 53 years, but I went in at 29. So there were people that were way older than me, and a lot of the older people didn't have them because after the 6th grade, they stopped and started working. You know what I mean? That's just how they did back then. Today, there ain't no state going for that for you all, but back then, that's just how it was. So a lot of them didn't have it because of that. They had to quit going to school so they can actually go to work and support their parents or their family. So therefore, but still, now because they were incarcerated, they had to go through the GED classes because it wasn't shown. So I was able to help several of them to be able to get their GED equivalency. Then after that, I was given a position in the law library because I already worked in the education department. So I ended up working in the law library for about 5 or 6 years and was able to help, well, no, 250 something, but I was able to help about 30 something people to either get their cases overturned, not necessarily overturned to where they set free, but overturned with an effective sentence counsel to where it starts the ball game again. I was able to get some of them get immediate release or their sentences reduced. So God blessed me to be able to do that as well when I couldn't even get my own case, anything done with it. So because of that, like I said, she was able to look into all of that and present it in her news article. And then once she ended up airing it on NPR, everybody that heard it was inflamed. Even the state senators that were right there, even just the mainstream media and the public, they was like, this is not right. This man did over 20 years on a nonviolent drug offense. He was out for nearly 2 years doing everything right. He didn't get didn't commit another crime. He didn't violate his probation. He didn't get a dirty urine, but you telling him he got to go back to prison. And so everybody that heard about it was outraged. And the good part about it is their outrage became an outcry, to where they just started saying this is not right, and they started getting on TV speaking about it. They started getting on social media, which we all know that the fastest way to reach the world now is through social media. So they started, putting my situation on social media and talking about it. And then once I was ordered to self-surrender on May 14th. So whenever I went to self-surrender, the NPR reporter brought a news crew there and filmed everything about me self-surrendering to United States Marshals. Well, once I self-surrendered to United States Marshals, she did the broadcast. I was back in the county jail waiting to go to a federal prison, over to the White House. Okay, that's good enough, you hired. No, but anyway, so I'm like, okay. And so he ended up taking it. He said, plus, he said, I need your verbal permission over the phone for me to take over the media aspect as well, because he said there's so many stories about you and they're getting fragments of it, or they putting pieces together that don't belong together. He said, that way I can make sure your story comes out correct. So I gave him permission to do all of that. I gave him verbal consent to do that. And from that time forth, he just continued to try to get me a pardon or a clemency. And we had received word because not only had he done it, but there was a petition filled out, if I'm not mistaken, got nearly 200,000 signatures on it, and almost the majority of the United States Senate and House signed it, you know what I mean, was asking for it. And so, but at the same time, he was like, so we're going to try to get you a clemency on pardon from the president. Then Kim Kardashian West and the judge actually released me when he spoke to the president on my behalf, because at that time she had helped Alice Marie Johnson to receive clemency from the president. So they went and spoke to him, and so we had word that the president was going to do it. But during that same time, there was a political cycle, and because the elections were near, nobody really wanted to touch criminal justice reform around that time. They don't want to seem soft on crime. So instead of me being on the front burner, they just put me on the back burner. But as I always state, they didn't take me off the stove, so I'm happy with that. But anyway, the election went on, and then Thanksgiving was nearing, and then Christmas. So I'm thinking, on Thanksgiving, normally that's when a president, any sitting president, pardons someone. So I'm thinking maybe they'll pardon a turkey, they'll pardon Matthew Charles. You know what I mean? But that didn't happen. Then around late November, I ended up watching the news, because if you really know what the First Step Act consists of, it didn't have that amendment in it that set me free just yet. It actually was addressing rehabilitation programs back in the federal system that allow people to have incentives to be rehabilitated. It addressed it no longer shackling female prisoners when they give them birth. It spoke about no longer placing in solitary confinement juveniles. It addressed no longer allowing the judge not to have discretion to make a decision whenever he sentenced somebody. So all those things were in the First Step Act. But as I'm sitting there watching the news in Kentucky, I end up seeing Senator Rand Paul get on the news, and he's like, these are different things that the First Step Act do. And then as he's stating it, then he states, and it makes retroactive to 2010 changes to the sentencing guideline. I'm like, what? And then the news station, you know how they speak it verbally, then they make like the 4 or 5 different points of the First Step Act, and that was one of them. I'm like, okay, they need to pass that. So now I got 2 eggs in the basket. One, believing that the president was going to grant me clemency or pardon, or the First Step Act passing. But I'm still believing that I'm going to receive the pardon or the clemency. And one of the reasons being is because, I don't know if I should state this or not, but we had strong encouragement that he was the president of the United States, Donald Trump, was going to do it. And that came from believable sources. So because of that, we was really believing that that was going to take place as opposed to the First Step Act happening. But once Thanksgiving went past, once Christmas went past, we know a lot of people are pardoned around Christmas time, and then New Year's took place, but nothing happened. But this did take place on New Year's. I ended up being called up to the bars by the jailer, and the jailer says, Matthew Charles, come up here. So I go up to the jail bars, and he hands me something. Now, I did legal work worked in the law library for about 5 or 6 years, but I did it for myself or people for about close to 16 or 17 years. So I knew what he was holding in his hand was a yellow legal envelope that they send to prisoners. And that is New Year's Day. And there's not a courthouse, state, federal, open on New Year's Day. And he got this legal envelope on January 1st of this year, well, it's 2020 now, of last year, saying, so I take it and I go back to the desk and open it up, and I read it, and it's a petition from the 2 public defenders asking the judge, now that the First Step Act, because it was signed into law December the 18th, now that the First Step Act has been signed by the president, Matthew should be immediate release. So I look at it, read it, but I'm thinking also that it's just something that the public defenders have filed on my behalf because they have been beyond helpful for me. So I didn't really give it much weight. I just took it and put it up on my bump. So because I'm still believing I'm going to get a pardon or clemency. That's where my head was at the time. So I put it up under the bump. Then 2 days later, I received it on January 1st. As I stated to you, no courthouse is open on January 1st. As a matter of fact, a lot of places ain't open on January 1st, let alone a courthouse. And then on January 3rd, 2 days later, most places still ain't open and functioning around that date. But 2 days later, the jailer ends up calling, a different one calls me up to the bars and said, Matthew Charles, come up here. So I go up there, and this time he's telling me, call your attorney. And I wasn't trying to be ugly or anything, but I'm like, I got 3 of them, which one? And he's like, because I had 2 public defenders and the Georgetown professor. They took my case pro bono. So he says, I think it's a lady, Mariah. I said, oh, Miss Mariah Wooten. And I said, it's a public defender. He said, yeah. He said, call her. And I said, well, you know, the phones have been down all morning because, you know, it was so close to the New Year's. Most of the people that was in my pod were just trying to reach out to their own family and kids to wish them Happy New Year's and was having trouble doing that. So he was like, yeah, I know they down. We got a phone company up front working on them. He said, but as soon as they come up, call your attorney. Like that, right? So I said, okay. He told me this around 10 o'clock in the morning. The phones ended up coming about 1:30, 2 o'clock. I was able to get on it at about 2 o'clock. So I called the public defender's office, and Miss Mariah Wooten, she's like real excited and hollering. She's like, Matthew, have you heard? Matthew, have you heard? I'm like, heard what? You know what I mean? Then she was like, are you sitting down? I was like, oh my goodness. You know what I mean? And then she was like, have you heard? Have you heard? I was like, no. She said, the judge signed your immediate release this morning. You going home. We're trying to get you out of there now. She said, we're trying to get you out of there for that evening. And they did get me out of there that day. So I ended up being released January 3rd, 2019. Once I went back to Nashville, about a week went by, and then I ended up getting a text from the public defender's office. And in the text, it was telling me that the White House was trying to contact me and wanted me to get in touch with them. So once I get in touch with the White House, this is in January, they asked me that I want to attend the State of the Union. Yeah, I want to attend the State of the Union. Yeah, why wouldn't I? You know what I mean? I'm like, I ain't even got no reason to be going to Washington, D.C. looking at the White House with my record. You know what I mean? So why wouldn't I? So they was like, well, you're invited to be Melania Trump's guest at the State of the Union. So I go to Washington, D.C., and at the time there was a government shutdown. So they didn't actually have the first State of the Union, or when it was actually first scheduled. So I go to Washington, D.C., and because they didn't have that, I was able to go over to the Senate, over to the Congress, and meet the senators and representatives that sponsored or signed the First Step Act. So as I'm going around having meetings with them, talking with them, thanking them, and I ended up getting in Senator Chuck Grassley's office, and he tells me, you know, he's 86 years old, he's an older guy, and he's a funny guy. He was like, Matthew Charles, if you'd have heard some of the speeches that I gave on the House and the Senate floor, you wouldn't believe that I supported the First Step Act. I'm thinking to myself, what am I doing here? You know what I mean? He said, not only did I support it, he said, but I'm the reason. He said, I was instrumental in the amendment being added that got you free today. Now I'm extending my hand like you're my best friend. You know what I mean? So he shook my hand, stuff like that, and we talked a little bit. Then I was able to go and see Senator Dick Durbin, and Senator Dick Durbin is somebody who supported the 1994 crime bill, and he tells me, he's like, well, that was the worst mistake that I ever made. He was like, I regret it so much. And he says, but don't you know one thing, Matthew? He was like, the Fair Sentencing Act of 2010, he said, I supported that. He said, the First Step Act, he said, I supported that. And he said, I'm going to continue to work on criminal justice reform. But the reason I threw that out there is because I'm trying to allow you to see 2 different political parties when it comes to criminal justice reform working together to get bipartisan legislation passed that address everyday people. And then I was able to go see Representative Doug Collins. Then I was able to also go and see Representative Hakeem Jeffries. So I was able to go speak with these people, and still in my heart, I'm like, knowing 20 years ago, people were running for the door when it came to criminal justice reform. Now it's like they doing the moonwalk up to it, you know what I mean? Everybody wanted you to know that it's not right and the system need to be changed. So after I met them, I ended up going back to Nashville, Tennessee, because as I stated, there was a government shutdown, and at the time Nancy Pelosi was like, no, State of the Union is not going to take place while there's a government shutdown. So I went back, and I think it was about a week or 2 weeks, because I know it's February 5th, I ended up getting a call this time from the White House and saying, the State of the Union is back on, would you like to come again? So I went up, and once I came up this time, I was being given a tour of the White House. So once I got on the White House grounds with the other State of the Union guests, all of a sudden, as we're walking on the grounds, we hear all this commotion. I turn around, and it's the Secret Service agents and Vice President Pence. And they, you know, people are like, get out of the way, get out of the way, get out of the way, make way, make way, wait. So I turn around and can see him a little bit, and then as soon as he sees me, he makes a beeline out from where they was and come over and gives me a bear hug. And like, I know you, Matthew Charles, like that. And I was like, wow. I'm saying this on the inside, you know what I mean? Then he, after that, I'm shaking his hand and everything. And he's like, take a picture. And I'm like, man, he took my phone way up there. Because, you know, they take your property once you come in. He said, don't worry about it. I'll call a photographer over and get a picture. And he called one over. He said, I'll make sure you get it. And he did. He made sure I got that picture. But he was the first person. I take a lot of pictures, y'all. But he was the first person I ever took a picture with after this situation took place. So then I was able to go, like I said, and get a tour of the White House. And then we was able to go down to the Oval Office where the president was sitting at his desk. Now, I just stated the reception that I had with Vice President Pence. So I'm like, okay, I don't know how this one is going to go. So I go down to the Oval Office, and as they're allowing each person to come in, walk over to the desk. It's brought from here to where the guy sitting on the back row with the orange and blue jacket. That's like the distance from where we stood until it was our time to walk that way around the corner to shake the president's hand and take a picture with him. So once it was my time, the Secret Service agent was like, okay. As soon as I start and his face hits mine or his eyes hits mine, he's like, get over here, Matthew Charles. I know who you are. So that took away all the heaviness right there that I had. So I walk over and I shake his hand, and he looks at me, and I shared this at a couple other places. He was the first person. I didn't even have a job as a FAM fellow, criminal justice reform fellow. As a matter of fact, I just came out of 22 years of incarceration. 21 years and 5 months before I was released for nearly 2 years, and the 7 months that I went back for the first step back past releasement. He was the first person, I'm talking about the President of the United States, Donald J. Trump, that shook my hand and said to me these words, Matthew, you're going to help a whole lot of people. He stated those words to me, didn't know anything about me at the time, and I didn't know I was even going to be given a platform to go around the country and speak about criminal justice reform, let alone share my story. But he stated those words, and they have came to fruition. But anyway, after that, we took pictures with him and stuff, and then later on, you know, he fed us real good. We ate at the Navy cooked for us at the White House, and then we ended up loading up into vans and buses, riding in the presidential motorcade to go over to Congress for the State of the Union, go over to the Capitol for the State of the Union. And as we get in the vans, they turn all the lights out. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to see you if you were sitting beside me on the bus. That's how dark it became on there. So they turned out all of the lights, and then they started barreling down the roads doing like 70, 75 miles an hour because everything was already blocked off because it was the president's motorcade. So in other words, they had already, blocked off all the, street and everything, and they turned out all the lights because they don't want people to know who and what vehicles. So, and I'm like, wow. And whenever I say that, wow, like that, one of the Secret Service agents who was doing the driving and another one standing guard looks back there and said, yeah, only we can do this. Like he interpreted what my wow meant. You know what I mean? So once we actually get into the go over to the Capitol and get inside and actually do the State of the Union. Once it got around to the part concerning criminal justice reform, the president speaks about Alice Marie Johnson, who he granted clemency to, who did over 20 years for a nonviolent drug offense, just like I did. And then he turns around and he speaks about me. And as he speaks about me, he said, Matthew Charles, and he speaks about the fact that over 20-something years incarcerated without one disciplinary infraction, stated I took over 30 different Bible correspondence courses throughout my period of incarceration, stated that I worked as a GED tutor in a law library, helping my fellow incarcerated people. And then he said to me, welcome home. And there was a standing ovation from both parties. And that was a beautiful evening. And he stated to me, welcome home. Well, that's something that every returning citizen wants to hear. Somebody tell them, welcome home. And it's up to us, meaning society, to make sure that they hear it. So anyway, because of that, and once I got back to Washington, D.C., I was asked to come up again, and FAM, which is Families Against Mandatory Minimum, as candidates, but not only are we against mandatory minimums, we're against all forms of criminal injustice, whether it be from not having an appropriate sentence, whether it be the treatment or the conditions of the prison or the treatment of the people while they're serving that sentence, as well as the barriers to reentry once that person is released. But I was attending one of the functions before I became a criminal justice reform fellow with FAM, and I was there with Holly Harris of Justice Action Network, the Coalition for Public Safety, and she pulled me aside and had a conversation with me. And after she had that conversation, then she walked up and spoke with Kevin Ring, who's the president of FAM, and stated that she was going to give him a grant to hire me and send me around the nation sharing my story and speaking about criminal justice reform. So after I received that position, now I have a job, but I can't find a place to stay. I attended the State of the Union, went to several states speaking to governors about criminal justice reform, but yet they won't even allow me to rent a house or an apartment when I had the means to be able to get one, which was a job. So one of my friends said, well, we're going to notify the Nashville Banner, and which is the Nashville, Tennessee newspaper. So once he informed them, she did the story, and then the story just took off again. And then Kim Kardashian West reaches out to me, and my friend Tim Hardiman, and states, okay, this is what I want y'all to do. And she had heard about the situation because she continued to follow my situation because she had spoke with the president on my behalf when I went back before I was released the second time. So she said, this is what I do. She said, you find a rental agency or homeowner that will rent to you and tell them that, you know, I'm going to be your co-signer and pay your rent for 5 years. And she was like, I said, okay. So once we did that, I ended up going to 2 other places and they still said no. I even had a rental specialist who helps people that have problems finding a place to stay to help me, and they still told us no. As a matter of fact, the rental agency ended up even knowing about my story and situation and felt sympathetic for me, that they was like, yes, we're going to do it. And once we ended up filling out the paperwork, the owner of that house said no, he's a felon, and denied it. And then that's when Kim Kardashian West was like, okay, don't even worry about it. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to tweet it myself. Then she stated, is there anybody in Nashville, Tennessee willing to rent my friend Matthew Charles a place to stay and give him a second chance? And that opened the door for like 200-some people. Now they calling and texting and everything like that. But I was able to secure a place. But had it not been for that, there's no telling how long I still would have been homeless. Now mind you, they were telling me that I could live over here, which are in areas that you would want a person that have come out of those communities and did all of the wrong things that they had done to go back to be enticed again. But that seemed like the only area because anybody can rent those places. But most parole officers, supervised release officers wouldn't even want you living in that type of environment. But they telling me that was the only place that you could stay. But anyway, we ended up finding a great place, and everything worked out, and she did pay my rent for 5 years, so that eased your mind. But anyway, but that allowed me to be able to go and speak without worry and concern about having a roof over my head. And since then, I've been able to go to the White House several different times and speak about criminal justice reform, as the president and his administration is definitely on board when it comes to criminal justice reform. And I've been able to go around speaking to different state legislators and governors, as well as organizations and groups and college students about criminal justice reform, because I state, and as I stated earlier in the class here, that you students are going to be the future politicians, lawyers, doctors, judges, nurses, teachers, or parents. And your opinions matter. And therefore, as long as you are aware of the situation, you may be able to give some wisdom whenever you hear the topic come up, or influence somebody. So my whole belief is that we need to get more people engaged. Oftentimes we try to use people that have been impacted by the system to actually go and speak with legislators in regards to criminal justice reform. The reason being is because until you see me personally, you may or may not have heard of my story. But when you see me and I'm speaking to a legislator who actually makes amends the law, then he's able to say, okay, the things that I'm going to co-sign on or support or endorse is something that's going to affect real people. So that allows him to make a conscious decision whether he really wants to support a certain bill or not. Plus we have those people that are addicts, alcoholics, and those with mental illnesses. They come and speak about how the fact that they were incarcerated and given a 5-year sentence or a 3-year sentence, as opposed to treatment for their addiction, and they went in and was able to find drugs while they were incarcerated that kept them with that addiction, or if they didn't have enough money to buy, any drugs while they were incarcerated, as soon as they got out and had a job, they went right back to it because they never were treated for their addiction or mental illnesses. So there has to be more than just incarcerating people that have those type of conditions, because if you treat one and not the other, they're still going to return to society unchanged. So we've been able to share that because there needs to be diversionary type programs where a person is able to, especially if they don't have to go to prison, keep them out of prison. Candace also stated about how Americans for Prosperity stand against mass incarceration and allowing every individual to live up to their fullest potential. That is a humanistic goal of every individual. It should be anyway. So therefore, the fact that we try to get help to the people that need the help, or get the ones that don't need to be incarcerated in some type of treatment program so that they don't get the big F on their record to now they're getting fired, or they can't find a job, or they're telling that you can't even have your children because you're a felon, or they're telling you that you can't work here and you have the skills and the educational level or the degree to be able to work that job. But having that felon, if you can stop a person from getting it that don't really need it, but they need some type of treatment or help, then get them that. And a lot of states don't have those diversionary programs. As a matter of fact, I was in the state of Arizona a couple of weeks ago, and I was in the state of Mississippi last week, and I'm laughing because it's sad, and they don't have that type of help. They use prison and prison alone to incarcerate people that have those type of conditions that should not be incarcerated. And my thing is not saying that a person that does wrong does not need to be incarcerated. I'm a firm believer that if a person commits a crime, they need to be held accountable for that crime. But I want to make sure that they go on with the appropriate sentence for the crime that they committed, and not a sentence that is not proportionate to the crime they committed. That's the reason I don't like mandatory minimums. Mandatory minimums, they don't work, won't work. South Carolina got some of them. But the thing about them is they cost taxpayers crazy money, and all they do is add to the numbers of mass incarceration. What I mean by mandatory minimum is it robs the judge of any discretion to make an informed decision whenever he sentences someone. A person can be sitting before him who has a mental illness, who had a single parent or was raised in foster care. He was, and I pray I don't offend anybody's sensibilities, he was molested, he was raped throughout the course of his foster care, and he just didn't receive any help in the system then, and he just been wayward ever since, and he's committed a petty crime, not a violent crime, but a petty crime, and now he's going to prison, and he's been like a sheep thrown among wolves, where there needed to be something to put him in a facility that dealt with the trauma and the mental illness that he's going through. Then you have people that are addicts, and I shared with the class a little bit earlier. I was in Kentucky, and I was speaking at this one event for this organization at the Life Learning Center, and one of the staff members shared with me how a person, and no, I ain't going to use that. I started to say, I don't know why this person was on crack cocaine, because I was going there, I thought that, drugs had changed. But anyway, this person was hooked on crack cocaine, but they actually did a 12-year sentence. And once he was released from the prison and given a bus ticket and a couple dollars to get a couple meals in transition to the transitional house, he stopped and got high on crack. He had been incarcerated for 12 years, so that alone show you that incarceration doesn't heal an addiction. So he was incarcerated for nearly 10 or 12 years. He ended up getting released, and from point A to point B, he stopped in the middle and got high. Once he got to the transitional house, they did a drug test on him. He failed it. They asked him what took place. He said, I stopped and smoked crack. But we utilize that example, and the reason that I incorporated it into my story a lot of times is I'm showing you that a person who has an addiction and that addiction is not treated is going to be released from incarceration with that addiction still. And the thing about it is 95% of everyone who's incarcerated is going to be released. If they don't have a life sentence or a death sentence, they're going to be released back into society. And once they come back into society, we need them better. We need them to be able to hit the ground running, being a functional tax-paying citizen. And therefore, we got to make sure that there are the right rehabilitative programs in the system so that they can achieve those goals. Because if not, they're going to add to the numbers of recidivism. That means a person that gets out 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, they back in all over again because they don't have anything out here to do. Well, there are a lot for them to do, but they just don't take full advantage of it. But still, I'm just saying it's up to us to make sure that there's opportunities available for them. And that's the thing that I like about the Life Learning Center, because I was actually, then I met a prosecutor named Rob Saunders, who had been a prosecutor for a while, and he had told me, he was like, I used to be one of those that made sure that a person that received that sentence served that sentence. He had that lock 'em up, throw away the key mentality. But now, not only is he promoting criminal justice reform, but he is the prosecutor who is in charge of the diversionary program for that county. And what he does is he screen the person, get their files, and make a decision whether he need to put this person in the program here that takes place, I think, for about a year, that allows them to go through this program successfully and not have to go to prison and get that felony on their record. Or, no, you need to go to prison. But as I stated, sometimes a person needs both of them. Sometimes they need to be incarcerated for their crime and receive some treatment for their addiction. I'm not saying that every addict that commits a crime shouldn't go to prison. I'm not saying that everybody with a mental illness that commits a crime shouldn't go to prison. I'm saying give them a variation of both of them, give them a mixture of both of them, or quit just siding over here with the incarceration. Because once they go in behind bars, all they're doing is buying time until they return to society. And that's the reason the numbers of mass incarceration are so high today. There are so many people incarcerated that do not have any type of judicial recourse, which means to file anything within the courts to get their sentences reduced. As a matter of fact, I was one of them. Had it not been for the laws and them being made retroactive, I would still be behind bars. My release date was 2029. Thank God I got in 2019. Thank God I got in 2016 first. But that just goes to show my actual release date with the sentence that I had was 2029. And the fact that a lot of those people, and I didn't have any judicial recourse, that was the point that I was initially speaking on. What that means is after you've been incarcerated for over 1 year from the time that your direct appeal has been denied, and then you get a year's time to file a habeas corpus petition. I'm talking about federal law because I was in the federal prison system. After that 1 year, you're foreclosed from filing anything with the court unless you can prove your actual innocence. Not factual innocence, actual innocence. And unless you are actually innocent, that's a high bar that pretty much nobody, you know what I mean, can meet. But still, they don't even have to hear you. So even if you file something and you have a legitimate claim, you foreclose from even being heard on it. Something has to be done to address those people that are stuck in the system like that. We have too many people with life sentences for nonviolent offenses. We have too many people with 60 and 80 years for nonviolent offenses. As I also shared here at Winthrop earlier, I was actually incarcerated with some people that had the same exact crime that I did, but they got 1 life sentence, some of them got 2 life sentences, some of them got 3 life sentences. In the federal prison, life is life till you expire, till you die, death by incarceration. I met people that had 80 years and 60 years with the same criminal history category I was and the same guideline range that I had. And then I met some that had 10 years and 15 years. So the fact that some people receive less time for pleading out, some people receive more time because of the trial penalty associated with you taking the prosecutor to trial or to court and saying, I don't want to agree with this 15 years because I'm 20 years old and you're telling me to just sign on the 15 years like it's 15 months. But if you do that, guess what? You're going to get 30 years instead of 15 years. And they have no problem sleeping at night giving it to you. So something has to be done to help all those people that are trapped inside of the system, as I call it, warehoused, so that they can receive some type of means to get the relief because they are incarcerated with a nonviolent offense. I'm a firm believer that 85% of all those that are incarcerated have been over-sentenced. I'm not saying they should not have been sentenced. I'm saying they have been over-sentenced. I'm also a firm believer that there should not be a life sentence given to any man, woman, or teenager for a nonviolent offense. But it's too many that already got the life sentence. Okay? And invite Candace back up, or...
I'd like to invite any of you who are interested to ask questions to feel free to raise your hand if we have any questions for Mr. Charles. I actually did have, oh, okay, I'll let you go first.
So what do you think made the senators change and be interested in criminal justice?
I'm going to repeat the question so everybody can hear it. The question was, what do you think made the senators change their mind and become interested in criminal justice reform?
I would say a lot of factors weighed in on that, but I would say the most interesting one, since we're talking about senators and legislators, is it has to deal with being fiscally smart. In other words, they realize that it's costing $200 billion per year of the taxpayers' money. But also because the times have changed and shifted. The fact that the data and statistics show that the way things were done in the past, I mean, a lot of people don't like when people utilize the word mass incarceration. I've had some people state that there's no epidemic of mass incarceration. But my thing is, if anything swells 200 or 500%, then that's a significant increase from what it was 20 or 30 years ago. So if you don't want to call it mass incarceration, you can call it whatever you want to. There's more people locked up now, over 2 million people, and this nation has more people locked up in it than any other country in the world. So I don't get bogged down on whether you want to, talk about whether there's an epidemic of mass incarceration or not. We just want to talk about these stupendous numbers that need to come down. But what made a lot of people change their minds concerning that was how much money was being spent per year, and the fact that the numbers were going up for those that are being incarcerated, and the age, which is still another factor because the health costs associated with those people becoming age is there. And then the fact that society realizes that somebody, just like, I'm going to give an example. When Alice Marie Johnson was able to personally meet the President of the United States, he was like naive that somebody could have received a life sentence just for hiding a phone or taking a phone and switching it off with another phone. That's what Alice Marie Johnson done in a drug deal for some people. So because of that, he was naive that she could receive a life sentence behind it. Well, I spoke with many legislators that were also naive that so many people received a life sentence for that offense. They are like kind of shocking and awe whenever I tell them I received 35 years. But the problem lies, or the realness of the situation is, I'm not an anomaly. Alice Marie Johnson isn't either. There are way too many people that are incarcerated with these excessive sentences that don't have anybody to speak out on their behalf. But a lot of senators and representatives, whether it be statewide or on a federal level, acknowledge that, realize that, and some states are doing something about it. As a matter of fact, some states are moving slower than others, but as long as they move and don't get stagnant, I'm happy with it. I'm not really happy with it, but I'm just saying at least something is trying to be done.
Anybody else have a question? Yes, go ahead.
What's your opinion on private prisons? Do you feel that they would help or harm the situation with having excessive sentences?
So what is your opinion on private prisons, and do you think that they help or harm excessive sentences?
Okay, I'm going to speak openly about it. I never had the opportunity to be at a private prison, but I have an opinion on them. I believe that whenever there are for-profit prisons, which means that those private prisons normally don't operate without any independent oversight, and oftentimes they're not even accountable to the state. But at the same token, if we're going to reduce the numbers of mass incarceration, and if we have, I'm going to speak about for-profit prisons as opposed to private prisons. For-profit prisons that's making their money by holding prisoners. You know what I mean? So that's not helping the situation. But at the same token, when it comes to private prison, it depends whether, I know, like say for instance, I just came out of the state of Mississippi, and I believe they need to close Parchment Prison for many reasons. And I voiced that there and did a press release as well concerning it. But they're looking to private prisons because they don't have anywhere else to house those people to get them out of there. I would say in a situation like that, it's beneficial. It's not really beneficial, but it is, you know what I mean? It'll get them out of a detrimental situation into a workable situation. So when it comes to private prisons, I just feel that there needs to be oversight, whether it's private or is government ran. You know what I mean? So regardless, I don't have a personal opinion one way or another. I do know that when it comes to for-profit prisons, I got a little stronger opinion because now in order for you to operate, you got to get some clients, and the clients are the prisoners. Okay.
On behalf of Winthrop University, I would like to thank Mr. Charles for coming today. I think that there's a few others who may still have further questions for him who are welcome to come up and talk with him after the event. And I want to hand over the microphone to Ms. Carroll to talk about what she would like to as well.
Thank you so much, and thank you again, Matthew, for sharing your incredible story with us this evening. We are honored that you took time out on a Tuesday night to come and join us, and I did want to draw attention to a flyer that was in your chair, and you can also grab it on the way out. We have a Criminal Justice Reform Day coming up on Saturday, March 7th in Fort Mill, the Courtyard Marriott. So if you like what you heard, you want to get more involved with what we're doing as an organization on criminal justice reform, this is a full-day event, about 10 to 4. It'll be 2 sessions in the morning, just in general, criminal justice reform overview. So looking at some of the areas that we're working on in regards to criminal justice reform. So sentencing reform, looking at policing practices, due process, and overcriminalization. We'll break for lunch, and then in that afternoon, we'll dive deep into mandatory minimums, what that means for the state of South Carolina, because there are some mandatory minimum laws here in the state, and what we can do about them as an organization. And we would love to have you guys stop by. Lunch will be provided. The entire event is free, so I definitely encourage you to take it home, put it on your refrigerator, and be sure to join us. Thanks again for taking time out on your Tuesday evening, and thank you so much, Matthew, for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.